I'd like to welcome Siddharni Jessi Korji. Then she can introduce each speaker. She could come up, please. I think we're going to have the following people join us. So you could take the first chair. You're going to introduce the people? Great. Dr. Ajay Singh ji, please come over. Dani Sangeeta Luthra, Dani Reshma Kaur, Dani Guneet Kaur, Rajesh Harse. Please come on up. As they take their seats, let me introduce Jessi Korji. Most of us know her as one of the most prolific authors and people who the community usually asks to do seva for any public forum where she gives speeches and talks, Gurbani Vichar. She has published widely. She travels around the world. We all know. In fact, I don't think there's anybody in this room who know her. And then you have also participated and seen most of her books, The Royal Falcon. She's written plays and produced, and has twisted many an arm into performing for her into those plays, including yours truly. Reshma ji and Sangeeta ji, please. Are we waiting for something? And Ajay? Ajay, you could, Dr. Ajay Singh. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessi.
Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you, JJ, for that introduction, and very honored to have you attach G after my name, perhaps the first and the last time you've done that. But thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here today. We're talking about crisis in leadership and the lessons gleaned from the life and teachings of the Sikh Gurus. A couple of years ago, the World Economic Forum conducted a survey about whether there is a crisis in leadership or not. And they talked to several thousand people from the cross-section of society across the world, and 86% of the people interviewed said that there was a dire crisis in leadership. Now, we don't need a survey to remind us of that. Every time we click our phone, or turn on the TV, or turn on our computer, we hear of something terrible happening somewhere in the world. It seems to be a systemic problem, not just with the US. But closer at home, we are definitely facing a crisis in leadership. What is the Sikh response? And what are some of the ways and shapes that this crisis is manifesting itself? It's visible on the political stage, international stage, conflicts all around the world, in the refugee crisis that we are facing, in the economic downfall of nations, in the women's issues that are coming up, and the Me Too movement that is making the assault on them obvious, and the abuse of children by churches in our own gurdwaras, where at the drop of a hat souls are whipped up and police is called. Shameful activity very, very close to home. So what do? Our times are terrible, but let's go back 500 years ago. How were the times then? We had an invader who started a Mughal dynasty and was a cruel emperor. We had atrocities heaped upon the masses. We had conversions by force. We had a price on the head of Sikhs. And then we had the Gurus born on this planet to redeem and save mankind and bring about social justice, the emancipation of women. They were the saviors, not just of Hindustan or India, but of mankind. So today, we're going to get some perspectives from an all-star, multi-generational panel. If I were to go over their resume, it would take half a day just telling you about these wonderful 5 tiaras that are on stage right now. I'm going to begin with Dr. I.J. Singh, an iconic figure, professor of anatomy, but well-versed in matters of mind and spirit and soul and Sikhi. Such a pleasure to have you here, Dr. I.J. Singh. And we're looking forward to have you share your one-liners, which are always witty, and your wisdom, which is cutting. We have Sangeeta Luthra, a dear friend, an anthropologist by training, but a very typical Sikh woman who is part of the Sikh diaspora and relates to what is needed to keep the Sikhi roots intact in the diaspora. Very passionate, very sincere about her work, both as an academician and as a Sikh. I'm proud to call her my dear friend. And then there is Reshma, who I always say lights up a room wherever she is. A Harvard undergrad, sharp as a whistle, witty, recipient of many awards, director of a US Department of Energy, author, leader of Women Tech forums. What else can I say, Reshma, other than it's a joy to know you. Guneet, what a pleasure to have you in this forum. Daughter of a dear friend, a Scripps undergrad, already an activist at your young age, creating waves, passionate about women's studies, gender issues, children's causes, Sikhi, always there in the forefront of Sikh issues. And Jujhar, so proud of you, Vacha. So proud of you. I've known Jujhar since he was a newborn, and all that I can say is, whatever Jujhar does, he does with his heart and mind and soul in it. Since he was very young, I could tell that he was an overachiever. He is a graduate, an undergraduate of Stanford, software engineer at Airbnb, but more than that, if you hear him do Bhangra, you know there's no tomorrow. He'll rock the stage and every single being that is there. If he translates a Hukambak, you'll be amazed at the depth of this young man's awareness and knowledge. If he talks about Sikhi, you're awed by how much he knows. How does one raise a young man like this? He comes gifted and blessed by the Lord. He's on the board of Sikri, teaches at Siddharth. So I wasn't kidding when I said that I have an all-star panel today. They're going to tell us about what they see as the leadership lessons given to us by our Guru. I'm going to call upon Dr. I.J. Singh and have him in about 4 or 5 minutes tell us about how he views the establishment of Sikhi and give us a foundation of what leadership is in terms of how you see
it. A tall order.
Not for a lofty individual like you.
You know, when I look at the Sikhs the world over, and over a lifetime, and their shenanigans in their gurdwaras and other societies all around. I wonder sometimes if we are a leaderless people, that we have no leaders, or if we are leader-led, as we ought to be, or we think we are. I know not how and why leaders emerge, why and when they don't. I speak from total ignorance, and let me do that for the next. You said 4 to 5 minutes, you just stole my 1 minute already.
6 minutes.
With our endless search for leaders, we have often more leaders than followers. But I don't know how the leaders emerge, when and why they don't, and what they're up to. First, some geopolitical realities of Punjab and northwestern India when Sikhi arose in the 15th century. Until the British and the French came in large numbers. All soldiers of fortune, migrants, traders, even the first settlers into India from Asia Minor, even the Greeks and Mongols and Mughals, they entered the subcontinent through a narrow passage, the Khyber Pass, into Punjab to settle, pillage, loot, perish, or return. This created a zone of genetic hybridization, mixed DNA in Punjab. So our DNA is now richer for the mixing, and we rival the Balkans and the United States perhaps in the mixing. War was a continuous phenomenon, and genetic hybridization, as you know, creates vigor. We must have a lot of vigor. Now if we can only get some sense, and life would be good. But look at much of India of the time. Divided into principalities, nation states, often at loggerheads with their neighbors. Rivalries with neighbors, invitations to conquerors were the norm. Hinduism divided along rigid lines of caste, in which women had few rights, low castes had none. Islam, the politically dominant phase, had become confrontational in enforcing conversions to Islam. Religions, they tell us, provide the glue that unites the people into a community. In India, I think the glue seems to have dried into crazy glue, with little peace for each other. Now, people minimally need participatory self-governance, economic hope, justice, social equality, institutional infrastructure, a code of ethics to support the communities, their hopes for a better future. A transformational paradigm shift was necessary, but does not happen in a day or a week or a month or even a year. 10 generations of gurus guided the process. There are as many styles of leadership as there are the aspirants to it. Leadership can be autocratic, democratic, strategic, transformational, charismatic, many a mixed model, and the meaning is clear from the definition here. In Sikhi, governance and leadership flow from Sangat, the organ of the community life. The practice of Sarbat Khalsa and the place of the Panj Pyare speak of communal shared responsibility. The institutions were superbly successful in their time, but no longer. The methods and structures need reinterpretation to include the voice of women, the place of non-Keshadhari Sikhs, the ever-expanding Sikh diaspora, the place of non-Indian and non-Punjabi Sikhs. These are contentious, manageable issues under the big tent of Sikhism. The global implications of leadership, keep in mind 2 principles. Where the cookie crumbles, 1, think globally but act locally. 2, power corrupts, and absolutely power corrupts absolutely. Now, no one can be a wise ruler until he has learned to serve honestly, learn to follow before you jump to command others. One cannot learn to die for a cause until he has walked the path. To lead, first learn to serve. Now, this thought is finding increasing resonance in progressive programs in business schools today, where they emphasize the idea of the servant leader. The concept underlines Sikh teaching when we speak of the Guru Chela concept. Leadership is not a matter of entitlement. It's in giving that we receive. That's biblical. And It says, Aap gavaye seva kare ta kich paaye maan. And that comes from the Guru Granth, page 474. The qualities to my mind are in the triad of being flexible, fair, and fluid. And I thank you and I look for a discussion. Thank you. Am I in time?
Would you, definitely, would you like to add just a couple of lines about how Guru Nanak Sahib, the founder of Sikhi, what kind of a visionary or a servant leader, or how did he lead by example? Just a couple of lines.
I hinted on that when I said that it took 10 gurus to look at the path. Obviously, each guru had the thing to do this time. Now, think for a moment. This is not in there. I just thought of that this morning. Think for a moment. Guru Nanak was the guru, the founder. He started with a certain set of ideas. Now, when his time came to choose a successor, choose not the son, but a follower. So one of the fittest men for the job to take us to the next stage. So every guru therefore had a stage and a model, and as I said, the many things that are needed to design a free, participating governance and culture, a free people.
What was Guru Nanak's particular style?
One more thing I want to add here, and that is this. When the time came for Guru Nanak to get the successor, Guru Angad, now we know that Guru Nanak, the body of Nanak, lived for a certain time while Angad was the Guru, right? Survived. Whether it was days or months, I do not know. History doesn't tell us that. But he was there. But there's not a single example where he might have interfered with Guru Angad's decision, or outguessed him, or told him that I wouldn't have done it. He didn't do that. Huh? That's about the simplest lesson that perhaps we could learn in the institutions we find here. The chairman or the president leaves, usually unwillingly, and of course, as long as he can, he keeps interfering. He's got a poker in the game. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Reshma, may I turn to you for a bit more elaboration on how the vision and mission of the founder of Sikhi was carried on by the next, say, 5 gurus?
Sure. Satchikalji, everyone. I would request everybody to close your eyes for a second, and I want you to visualize when Guru Nanak Sahib came to the world, and Babur at that time was attacking India. He had just pillaged and marauded his way all the way to India. And there is a young farmer. Now you can open your eyes. Think about the pillage. And a young farmer, he sees this atrocities being committed, and he's awakened. He says, this is anarchy. And what we need right now is manas ki jaat sabe eke pehchanbo. He is the one who is the visionary who laid the foundation of our entire faith. 500, 600 years later, we still believe in that main message. So for Guru Nanak Dev Ji, he's really kind of the person who did activism both by faith, so his leadership through a faith-based activism, but also when he went through his udasis all over the world, he did his 4 long udasis, his intellectual discourses. You know, what we're doing today is an intellectual discourse, but making that from a discussion to an activism, taking it from thought to belief to action, I think that's a leadership he really showed us. So today we can sit here and we can think about the anarchy which is happening in the world with nationalism and all the horrible stuff that's happening. It can take one human being to change the world, and he showed us that.
So, Reshma, you are a director at a U.S. Department of Energy, and you authored a book called Building Innovation, Clean Tech Technology, right? So I'd like you to tell us how the gurus built institutions that supported their vision.
So it may be worthwhile now to kind of go into, after Guru Nanak Sahib, maybe the first few gurus, because not a lot is written and spoken about the first 5 gurus. We kind of focus a lot of thought process on some of our most charismatic gurus, Guru Har Gobind Sahib and Guru Gobind Singh Ji. But if you think about when Guru Nanak Sahib said, "Jo to prem khilan ka chao, sir par tali gali meri aao," he really laid the path for the next few gurus to carry on his work, institutionalize it and codify it, so Sikhism became an established religion. So he left Sikhism in its infancy with a set of beliefs, the 3 golden rules, which were very universal and very inclusive and laid the path of fairness and social justice. But when I look at Guru Angad, who's basically Lena, he's a part of his body, right? And it is not a hierarchical system or hereditary system where the second one is just a son or a child of the first. But he literally, Guru Angad Dev Ji is probably even more important because it's the second one that perpetuates the thoughts of the first. If you don't have a first follower, there is no legacy to be built. So
that is something very important that Reshma just said. If the leader doesn't have a second, that leadership peters away. That's golden. Please carry on.
So Guru Angad Dev Ji, I think if Guru Nanak Dev Ji, we can sum up his life into 2 words, visionary and activism. I think Guru Angad's work and legacy, maybe we can sum up in 2 words, and I think it's community and access. So I think what he built and what is really needed today is for the community to come together. And perhaps the 2 things he did most importantly was, number 1, to build a language. He codified Gurmukhi as a script for us and provided access. So beyond the Brahmins who could access Sanskrit and the scriptures, I think what he provided for us was anybody without a middleman could access and be part of a strong community with the establishment of Langar.
And have access to spirituality and growth and inner growth, right?
Absolutely.
Which was totally denied.
Absolutely. And I don't want to go very deep into maybe the other 3 Guru Sahibs that I want to touch upon.
Let's go ahead.
Okay, so for example, if you look at Guru Amar Das Ji, so when he takes on Guruship at the age of 70, he's a wise person, he's an experienced person, right? And he's, I think what he really did was the spread of Sikhi and the spread of influence of Sikhi. So while Guru Nanak Dev Ji established, Guru Angad Dev Ji started sowing the seeds of community and inclusiveness through Langar, through Gurmukhi. I think what Guru Amar Das Ji really did was deeply analyzed what was happening with the Brahmanical times at that time, and he really looked at influence. So I think 3 things that he did which established influence and dispersal of Sikhi. Number 1 was the manjis. So it was like a hub and spokes model. So while the Guru Sahibs were at Kiratpur and Kartarpur, he established manjis where he chose eminent Sikhs who were respected, and they established different centers and managed to disperse the teachings of Sikhi. The second thing which he did, which is actually very interesting in today's times, was established the Bisova Divas or the Vaisakhi Divas, which was, yes, I'm sending my messengers at different places, but I'm also bringing people in. Let's say it's like an annual conference, like we have an annual conference today, where we're bringing people from all over the world and all over the country. Bisova Divas was really kind of the annual conference where Sikhs could come and talk to each other and get strength from each other's faith.
The spirit building event.
Correct. And the third thing he did was, when he saw people rushing to Hardwar and to places where they could go and dip in the Ganga, he said, the spirit of Vaheguru lives everywhere. So he built a Bauli at Goindwal, which was kind of an anti-establishment. So what he really did was, he said, you don't need to go to Ganga, the same water. It's a very beautiful Sakhi, where he actually told this gentleman who was going to Ganga, and he said, if you really think Ganga is so pure, bring back the water for me. So this man went to the Ganga, and every time he tried to bring the water, the lota would slip from his hand. And he could not bring the Ganga back. But when he came back to Goindwal, and he saw this beautiful Bauli there, he says, Ganga is here, Ganga is everywhere. So I think this anti-establishment, removing old rituals and saying that you don't have to be an ascetic to be a true Sikh. You can be a householder. You can be a person who takes on both spiritual and temporal activities. So I think this removal of old influence and establishment and spread of influence was very important with Guru Amar Das Sahib. With Guru Ram Das Sahib, I think his most tangible effort and leadership was taking the same principle of the Bauli, he established Amritsar, the Amrit Sarovar. So I think this codification, if you look at how Salesforce today makes its towers in San Francisco, when you look at how Apple builds its beautiful edifice in Cupertino, and you look at how the Guru actually established the Golden Temple so many years ago, and it's still the most important place for us. I think that legacy and that institutionalization and nation building really started getting tangible at that time. And finally, I really want to touch upon Guru Arjan Dev Ji, who through his sacrifice showed that leadership can be through service. And I think all of the gurus really show that leadership is really about other people. It's about strengthening the community. It's about spread of influence, not for what we do today in LinkedIn is like, yes, how many followers do I have on Facebook? How many people are liking my posts? It's really about, do I leave a value behind? Do I leave a legacy behind, which is going to make other people grow, be happy, and bring back goodness to the world? I think that's what we need today, and I think that's really the most powerful message of Sikhi is how over the centuries the gurus established this pathway for us that we can actually embrace and follow.
Thank you, Reshma. I'm going to turn to our youngest panelist. She's very active in causes that are dear to her heart. She just came back from an internship in Hawaii where she focused her summer on women and gender issues. And Guneet has a feisty spirit, and you will hear it. And I want Guneet to talk about the next few gurus and also relate them to the causes that are dear to. Because, yes, this is wonderful what we're hearing about the gurus. But how do we apply some of these to our circumstances, to our communities, to our, to perhaps creating a movement?
Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you so much, Jessi Auntie. So I'm going to start kind of just where Reshma Auntie left off at Sri Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji and his concept of Meri Pidi, which I personally see as kind of one of the focal points in terms of Sikh history, in terms of the Gurgaddi being passed down. The establishment of Meri Pidi, as we know, Guru Har Gobind Sahib wore two swords, right? One of Meri, or temporal and worldly power, and one of Pidi, or spiritual power. The two swords that are still kept alive today in our Khanda, as well as in our Sikhi. And this is a really, really important moment in terms of access as well, I think. Kind of jumping off of what Reshma Auntie said. In this moment, Sri Guru Har Gobind Sahib really tied Sikh spirituality as inherently connected to social justice and a fight against oppression towards truth, or Sat, right? And in this moment, he really established the idea of the Sant Sipahi, the saint soldier, and that there are two aspects to Sikhi. And this really goes back to access as well. And just thinking about, like Jessi Auntie was touching on, thinking about before the gurus, who had access to spirituality, who had access to the divine power, who had access to praying, to inner growth, and who that was kept from, right? And we have the image of the Hindu monk, like the bald Hindu monk sitting way far in the forest, far, far away, removed from society, who has a surplus of economic power that's allowing him to do that, who has someone probably taking care of his parents and his family at home that are allowing him to go find Vaheguru, or find the divine. And this model was really disrupted by Sikhi, which is so, so powerful. This model was really torn down by the gurus, who said, no, that's not true. Spiritual power is only as important as temporal power. It's only as linked to our path to Vaheguru as politics and social justice and all these things that so many folks in society are facing, are being influenced by. So yeah, I think in a Western society like the one we live in, it's really interesting to see in the last 4 years, how the cycles of politics have kind of turned, right? And in a lot of ways, people are saying that a mask has come off, right? And all these things that were under the radar, all these sentiments, things that were building up, the mask is ripped off. Nobody can deny that these things are happening now. And a lot of this oppression is really perpetuated at the hands of capitalism. We can talk about wealth inequality in this country. We can talk about racial supremacy. We can talk about patriarchy. And these things also, however, affect our communities in so many ways. And with Guru Har Gobind Sahib, at the core of his tenets and his practice, he was very focused on inclusivity and allyship, as were all the gurus. And I like thinking of the gurus using this word ally, because I personally, when learning about Sikhi, definitely questioned, where the girls at, right? Where are my female gurus at? But then thinking of the gurus as allies, as folks who had that power in society. Many of them were coming from upper caste male families that did have a voice and were able to say, hey, no, people, this is what's happening right now is not okay. What's happening to women right now, the practices of sati, these are not okay. What's happening to Dalit women right now, in our caste supremacy, that's not okay. And just thinking about allyship as ourselves, as people who really hold power and hold some sort of privileges, and in many ways that privilege is Sikhi. It's the ability to be in this room and to have these intellectual conversations, to have a Guru Granth that gives us so many valuable lessons that we can carry on. And so I think with Guru Har Gobind Sahib, this idea of inclusivity is also very evident in the Bandi Chhod Divas story that many of us, I'm sure, have heard, where when Guru Sahib was imprisoned and was offered freedom, he completely refused. He refused to accept it without extending his allyship and advocating for those who are wrongfully imprisoned. And we can talk about prisons in this country as well. We can talk about who's making up those prisons and who's wrongfully imprisoned there. And we can talk about how relevant that exact moment in Sikh history and in Sikh Guru history is literally in 2018 right now. And we can talk about Sikhs who are in these institutions, right? We have Sikhs in detention centers right now because of the immigration policies in this country and how all those things are changing. Those things are very relevant to our community. But also, it goes deeper than that, because we're talking about things at a national level and we're talking about things at a community level. But before that, there also is the level of the family and the level of the self, right? And it all starts from the self. It starts with having those learning moments with yourself, on educating yourself about these issues, about what's happening in society, who's marginalized, how these power systems are functioning, who's at the bottom of the racial hierarchy, of the class hierarchy, and who is, who these power systems are really over and over again, always annexing at the very center of all these axes. And I think it's really interesting to see how from day one, the Gurus really understood how these power systems were functioning during Mughal rule. And in so many ways, those things still exist to this day. But let's talk about our community. In a lot of ways, we have an amazing community. We are all in this room today. We have a very diverse panel up here. But also in a lot of ways, we have a very classist and fractured community. Think about it. How many of us really come from caste-integrated communities or caste-integrated families? How many gurdwaras in California alone are built on caste? And how can we change anything if we really have this casteist, classist infrastructure? All just food for thought. And then think about gender in the gurdwara. Who is doing the visible versus the invisible seva? Who is granted the opportunity to lead and address the sanghas? And in the Darbar Hall, typically, who are the members standing at the front, in the closest proximity to the Guru, attending to the Guru?
And who gets the Panch Pyara Prashad when it's distributed?
Exactly.
And who is passed over? Mm-hmm. These are very symbolic things. And I don't mean to interrupt your train of thought, but I just want to point out something else that you said, which is very meaningful, that here are gurus from a very privileged background giving up those privileges for the fight for truth, for the fight for social justice, for the elevation of women, right? And we are all very privileged here. And what are we giving up for the fight for truth and the fight for social justice? also, one of the things you talked about, was mentioned here by Dr. I.J. Singh first, is the concept of servant leadership. And what we're seeing today is strongman leadership,
Yes.
strongman politics. We're seeing macho leadership. We are seeing this is the way, and I don't care what you think, right? So we've come a long ways, and yet we've gone back to the time of the gurus where the exact same things were happening.
Yep. Absolutely.
So I think I would love for you to go on, but I think for the sake of time, I want to move on to Sangeeta. I know she's very passionate about these exact same issues and has often in this forum and in her talks talked about time for rising up to combat violence by the sword and the time for diplomacy. I know this is an issue that's dear to her heart, and I'd like Sangeeta to focus on our 10th guru, who really epitomized the servant leadership as well as the philosopher king aspect of leadership. Philosopher king aspect where you are a king, but what you say and do comes from a deep wisdom and inspiration that inspires. So Sangeeta, take it away with the lessons of leadership and service that come to us directly from our last guru.
Thank you, Dee. And Guneet, I love the idea,
Absolutely.
the concept of the ally. I mean, you know, in Gurbani, we're always hearing about how the guru is our friend, our pyara, but also the ally. And it's a beautiful metaphor. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Guru Gobind Singh Ji. I picked the most charismatic and easiest guru to talk about, but I wanted to talk about him in terms of choices. I mean, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, from a very young age, was always faced with these really life-changing choices. And
A little bit louder.
sorry. And so at first I was going to talk about those moments, but I thought, let me just kind of summarize the elements of Guruji's leadership style that I find very inspiring, but also very, very relevant to the issues that we as a community, we as a nation, we as a world are facing. So first of all, I would focus on Guruji's commitment to the dignity of all human beings, and the idea that, you know, and the idea that even finding the humanity in his opponents and in his enemies, and that ability to, even in the heat of battle, to be able to look across the field and see a soldier who is hurt from the other side and see their humanity, that's a leader who has a very special gift to give us, because the battle can't go on forever. And this is something also that I really admired about Guruji, that while he fought grudgingly. And when he could stop fighting, he stopped and used his words and used his pen. So one important characteristic is this notion that Guruji lived by in many, many moments in his life, the concept of a shared humanity and the dignity of every human being on the planet, really, and to constantly teach us to look at each person and think about them and their dignity, the value they bring to the world in front of us. The other thing that I admire about Guruji, he built institutions that promoted consensus building and democratic principles. And the most obvious one, of course, is the creation of the Khalsa. There's a wonderful scholar, Arvind Pal Singh Mandir out of the University of Michigan, and he described the Khalsa as a moment of radical egalitarianism. and I think that those words really capture what the Guruji was looking for. You know, how do we create institutions that really give everybody a voice? And sometimes some voices are muffled and others are louder, but the institutions insist that everybody should have an opportunity and have a voice. So of course, within the Khalsa, we see all these moments of radical egalitarianism, and his insistence on that, you know, the kind of fact that the Khalsa demands a kind of renunciation of caste and our caste identity, at that moment in time was probably the most radical thing you could do. And then, of course, something that Dr. Ajay Singh spoke about, the idea of the leader being also a peer. And this was the other brilliant thing about Guruji, is that he saw himself as a peer to the Khalsa, right? And we all know this because we've all probably heard these Sakhis, but the concept of Ape Gur Chela. So in our lingo today, he was a very peer-driven leader. He led with the people, not ahead of them. And then, so this is another really kind of really important thing that I think that we should all think about and aspire to. And then he also really thought about his leadership was really focused not on kind of personal gain or national glory, but it was really a very pragmatic leadership. How do we deal with crises that we're facing? How do we solve the problems of the community and of the collective? So he was, in many respects, very pragmatic. For all his brilliance as a philosopher and scholar, he was also pragmatic, and part of pragmatism is being flexible, is being able to admit that maybe the path I'm on right now isn't working, and I can shift to something else. That requires a level of humility and self-awareness that it's very hard. I mean, you know, I know that when I have arguments with my children, it's very hard for me to back down sometimes and say, oh, maybe, you know, maybe I'm not right about this. You know, we as parents, we're so anxious and want to make sure that our kids are on the right path, but sometimes they are right, and sometimes we are wrong, and how difficult it is to just be quiet and say, okay,
and that's
maybe you have a point here. So I do feel that, you know, so just to wrap up, I mean, you know, Guruji was this he engaged in what I like to think of as a very principled pragmatism. He was willing to change course. He was willing to stop the battle and write the Zafarnama. How much humility and foresight and long vision it took to be able to say, you know, to write to Aurangzeb, or was it to Aurangzeb? I should be sure. But to write to his enemy, his opponent, and say, look, we can stop for a minute and we can think about something, maybe a way to get out of this conflict. So in a world where people are so anxious, and I think today in the political atmosphere, there's a desire to kind of engage, get angry, you know, confront. What Guruji showed us was that sometimes you have to pause, think about your own motivations, think about, am I doing this for my own ego, or am I doing this because it's for the greater good? And you know, he just modeled these things throughout his life, and it's an amazing role model to have, as did all the gurus. But
very, very beautiful, Sangeeta. I want to emphasize a couple of points that you've touched upon. Guruji did not win battles to raise his own flag, to start his own coins, to annex territory, but he never struck the first blow. He waged battles to give the power back to the people. And one of the symbolic things for that is the Panch Pyara. How at a time of a crisis, the Panch Pyaras ordered the Guru to leave the fortress. And talk about humility and submission and giving the power back to the people. And he did listen to them. The Zafarnama was an act of humility, but it was also an act of victory. It's a letter of victory. And raising the awareness of a tyrant and making him aware of what true Islam teaches is what he did with Aurangzeb. It is said that soon after he got that letter, he was crushed and he passed away. He poked at his conscience. And today, when we live in silos of right-wing or left-wing loyalties, and there is so much discord, and there's so much hatred. And even though we have the First Amendment that ensures that we speak openly, we attack each other for that. I think we need to remember that all voices need to be heard, and pause is a very important juncture in our striving for harmony. Tujar, you have a tough task. We've talked about leadership, we've talked about the amazing role models of the gurus in their lives. What happened after the guru? Do we have good examples of post-guru leadership? Do we have a succinct definition left to us in Sri Guru Granth Sahib about who a good leader is? Do we have any contemporary leaders? I know we have very little time, but take 5 to 6 minutes and give us a quick summary of the post-guru period and perhaps throw some light on what we can do today. And we'll open it for discussion for a few minutes after that. If you have any questions, please send them my way. If you want to address them to a particular panelist, that's fine. Otherwise, I'll open it up, and whoever wants to answer those questions would be just as good. Tushar.
Vaheguru Ji ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji ki Fateh. Ik Onkar. This is the foundation for Sikhi. One force, one power. And what I want to echo from the previous panelists is that if everything is one, then there is no other. Na koi vairi nahi biganda. So when we talk about the leadership style of the gurus, it came from that beginning and that idea that everything that is done, every piece of revolution, is done out of love. And I think that's one of the key differentiators between, one of the key differentiators of a good leader. There are times when you have to fight. There are times when you need to stand up for what is right, and whether it comes from a place of anger or a place of love, in a lot of ways determines whether you will be victorious, in my eyes. So Jessi Masi asked me specifically about the post-Guru period. I think one of the key things that Sangeeta Aunty talked about was the Guruship given to the Khalsa Panth. Guru Gobind Singh said, you are now ready, you have the individual values, you are the masters of your own destiny. Guru Granth Sahib will be your guide, and you will make the impact in the world that is revolution. And I want to make up a few examples of Sikhs who I think have helped do that. The first example being Banda Singh Bahadur. Here's someone who was, until the age of 38, was not involved in Sikhi. And then meeting Guru Gobind Singh Ji is completely transformed and says, I'm your Banda, I'm your slave. And the way in which he leads the Sikh Panth, the call, is all about political freedom. He goes to different places in the world and he says, the people who were working under the Zamindari system, which basically made them very poor, but they were working the land, they were now given that land as their own. Political power was given back to those people. The Rakhi system was established where Sikhs all over were saying, we'll help protect you and allow you to live your livelihoods, and you will help support us as well. And so I think Banda Singh Bahadur really embodied the idea of giving power back to the people as well. Then, after Banda Singh Bahadur, was kind of a dark time in the period of Sikh history in terms of Sikhs are being hunted, price on people's heads, and they have to hide in basically the jungles. But even at that juncture, the spirit of Chardi Kala and leadership is so strong in them. You have Khalsa Boli, where, when langar is finished, it's said, langar mast ho gaya hai. Or when you're given a piece of roti, it's called prashada. These are all ways of keeping that Chardi Kala spirit alive, that no matter what the circumstances are, we are still a sovereign people and we are still in love with that Ek Onkar. And I think sometimes it's when those times are hardest that you really see what a community is made of. And the ability to stick by one's principles and to continue being in that Chardi Kala and love was huge. And then we had a system, the missile system, which was a example of distributed power. So you had 11 or 12, depending on how you count it, missiles that all had their own ideas. They didn't agree on everything. They had their own ways of doing things, their own ways of going about X, Y, Z. Today you might think of different jathebandis or different groups of people. You know, do you eat meat? Do you not eat meat? Do you wear this color or that color? Do you do this or that? They all had their own personal ways of connecting with that Sikhi. But when the times got tough, they came together and decided how to attack those problems. The Sarbat Khalsas every half year during Diwali and Vaisakhi, where they came together and they said, it doesn't matter that you and I don't agree on this small thing. We have an existential threat, and we need to decide how to pool our resources in order to fight it. And so, I mean, you can look at more, I think at the end of the day, what differentiated these leaders, if I might make a thesis, was their connection to Ikonkar. It was their ability to tap into that one. And if you look at even the Shabad today, right? Man tan tera, tan bhi tera. They were at that point where it said, I'm free. I've found you, Ikonkar, and for you, everything I have is yours. Everything I have is going to be in service of that mission. And when you're in that state, there's no more fear. There's no more jealousy. There's no other except for that one that makes your purpose very clear. Because it's hard to be a leader sometimes today. It's hard to go up and fight, and it's exhausting. And if you don't have that source to replenish you, it's an easy way to burn out. So the gurus, I think, gave us that inner strength to be able to combat whatever issues come in our way. And in my opinion, that's our source of strength. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Do we have questions from the audience? Otherwise, I have a few that I want to ask the panel.
In terms of the seventh Guru, Har Rai Ji, he was, the main concepts that he felt important to propagate was a free education and free healthcare. The two primary, so he went around and established, so many schools and so many dispensaries where you did not have to pay a fee or to get a service or to get education. He predates all the environmentalists. I mean, he was the ecosystem he knew depended on humans. So he was so forward-thinking in terms of preserving nature, of not over-farming, of not cutting down forests, of not, all of those water conservation, recycling, all of those ideas he sort of brought into practice. It was just an amazing period where after the tumultuous sort of times of Har Gobind Ji, there was a period of establishment of, building the Paniri, as we call it. And then lastly of Guru Har Krishna Ji, in terms of his leadership and his compassion of healing, of, propagating, of giving courage at the time of despair, and Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji of his great sacrifice. Just what an amazing leader he was. He knew the challenges ahead, so he unified the community in so many different ways, traveled far and wide. So those seeds of love that Nanak had sort of scattered in all four directions, these were all now becoming groves of devotion and leadership in all of this.
Excellent pointers, and thanks for bridging the gap. I think for the sake of time, we had to gloss over some very important details. Saniji, you very, very aptly point out the contribution of Guru Har Rai, who actually started a research center where research was done on herbal medicines, Ayurveda research. And he also, when Shah Jahan reached out to him regarding his son Darashuman's grave illness, he actually helped out. Now, here, just look at this, laying aside what happened in the times of Jahangir, putting aside that enmity, that rancor, that desire for revenge, he looked after his son and healed him, which later enraged Aurangzeb. And he took the life of Guru Tegh Bahadur. And Guru Harkrishan, I mean, talk about sacrifices at so many different levels. You give up your head to save the dignity and the freedom of worship of a people with whom you don't agree. And then you give up your life taking care of the sick and the diseased at the age of 8. I mean, we have such incredibly lofty examples of leadership. I have a question here that has already been answered. Do Sikhs expect to have a democracy or a monarchy? Very clearly, Sikhi laid the foundations of radical egalitarianism, to quote Sangeeta here. Any other questions? Otherwise, I'm going to ask Puneet. Sorry, go ahead. Why do we have our proceedings in English when the Gurus conducted everything in Gurmukhi? Does anyone want to answer that?
I can answer that.
Yes, please.
When Guru Angad Dev Ji established Gurmukhi and codified it as a way of access for people to understand what was happening, it was in the context of the spoken tongue at that time, which was Punjabi in Punjab. Today, when we want to have our children have access to what we're saying, I think we're following that without forgetting that our roots are in Gurmukhi and our scriptures are in Gurmukhi, and you can never explain the exact meaning of some words in Punjabi, but however, for the sake of access, I think it's important to do that. Just pragmatic.
Thank you. Guneet, would you like to go back and talk a little bit more, maybe a couple of minutes, about the causes that are dear to you personally, and what are you doing? I know you're doing a lot. And the reason I'm asking Guneet is this, that discussions can go on endlessly, but we need to have some takeaways. And here is a young lady that is putting into practice what she believes in.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jessi Auntie. Yeah, so, okay. I think we've talked about social justice a lot, and we have recognized the fact that the fight for social justice can take many, many, many forms. And the Gurus established that as well, right? That you can't have Sikhi without having social justice. You can't have Nam without having action. And in many ways, a lot of this action and this dialogue starts from within. So from educating ourselves on these issues, staying involved in interracial and interfaith dialogue, which I know so many of you all are doing, and even just learning our own histories and having the hard conversations with our family members and like helping break down those prejudices. And I think in a lot of ways, making Sikh spaces accessible and Sikh communities welcoming and supportive to the most marginalized folks in society. So thinking about how to support like our Black community members, and how to support Indigenous folks whose land we are on, and how to support LGBTQ folks who are in our communities, and recognizing that so many of these people are in our communities, but are they talking about these things? Do they feel like they can talk about these things? yeah, and just really bridging a lot of those gaps. And that also means, in a lot of ways, means opening up really, really difficult conversations within our communities. And I think that goes back to the Guru's courage. And that's something I've been thinking a lot about. Is in so many ways, it, like Jujar says, it can be very exhausting, and it can be really, really difficult to constantly have these conversations. But that's why the Gurus enabled us. They enabled us with Nam, they enabled us with Bani to be able to replenish ourselves. And I think within our communities, there are also many, many difficult topics to talk about, like let's talk about substance abuse. And let's talk about domestic violence and the cycle between those two. Let's talk about how common that is in Sikh communities. Let's talk about mental health. Let's talk about mental health in this Trump era, in the post 9/11 world. Let's talk about that. And let's talk about how the three create a cycle. And let's also talk about going a little bit further back. Let's talk about the ways our community needs to heal from older trauma. Let's talk about partition. And let's talk about opening up those conversations with our grandparents. Let's talk about the struggles of 1984, and then the struggles of 9/11, and in so many ways, generation after generation of difficult things that our people have gone through and have in so many ways overcome. But are we talking about those things? How are those things living on within us? How are so many of those things still affecting our mentalities, our psyches? And then how is that intergenerational trauma passed down? I think in a lot of ways, it comes back to really having those difficult conversations and starting from, like Jessi Auntie, like you said, starting from within the community and starting from within the family. And then also taking that next step to bridge gaps between our community and the communities around us. Thinking about who are our neighbors in this Gurdwara area, who are our neighbors on our campus. On my personal campus, there's a lot of solidarity work done between different communities of color, and we're constantly working to improve that, right? In a lot of ways, we hold these very political identities of being Sikh, of being Punjabi, of being misrecognized and misidentified in so many ways. And I think there's a lot that can be done and a lot of parallels that can be drawn between our struggles and the struggles of our Black brothers and sisters and our Indigenous brothers and sisters in this country. And I think, yeah, I just think that there's a lot of internal things that our community has dealt with that are so similar and so tied to the internal things that many other communities that surround us have dealt with. And there's a lot of work that we can do in parallel with each other.
Thank you. Thank you so much for those very insightful pointers. We started 15 minutes late, but I'd like to give some of that time back to the organizers. But I have a question, and I'd like to pose it to all the panelists. So I'm going to start with Jujar, and I'd like each of you to give us a one-liner on how can we bring the lessons of good leadership in our lives, because it all begins with self-empowerment. And how do we bring the Guru's message home within ourselves, to our families, to our communities? I know I'm asking, this is a tall order, but keep it to a line or 2 sentences. And let's start with Jujar this time.
The first slok of Asa ki var, Balhari gur apne devhari sadwar, Jin manas te devte kiye, karat na lagi var. Our goal in life is to go from human to divine being. And I think that happens through a personal connection with the Guru.
Love it. Thank you. Would you like to say something else? Or, okay, Reshma.
I think 2 phrases when it comes to just pragmatic, everyday leadership. One is man niva matuchi. So, asi roz ardas karne a ke sara man niva rave, par matuchi rave. I think that's really kind of distinctly encapsulates leadership for me. And the second is Sarbadda Pala. Like I mentioned, all our gurus, I think that was the main credo. It wasn't Apra Pala, it was Sarbadda Pala.
So how do we, Sangeeta, I'm going to give you yet another level to this question. How do we bring these amazing lessons from the Guru in our daily life, in our good leadership decisions?
Well,
I'll address that, but I wanted to, my one line or
Yes,
one
please
word takeaway is that while we talked, I think I and Jujar also emphasized the notion of ekunkar, the oneness that is the reality. One of the other important ideas is a respect for diversity, which the Gurus also indicated in their lives. Guru Nanak Dev Ji traveled around the world, engaged with people of many different cultures and backgrounds, as did Guru Gobind Singh Ji. So they were not parochial. In other words, they were not only focused on their own community and tradition, they were open to many traditions. And related to that, I read a blog by Nanlal Ji, in which he talked about the fact that, which I didn't know this fact, that within the Guru Granth Sahib there are 22 different languages within the Guru Granth Sahib. So that was also, so English may become the 23rd language, or Spanish may become the 24th language. But the point of that was that the Gurus, again, were really, truly multiculturalists. As an anthropologist, that's dear to my heart. But they really were. They weren't afraid of people who were different from them, and yet they could find some commonality. So
Thank you.
I hope I answered that.
Dr. Aijit Singh, wrap it up for us.
All right. I'm going to take some an unusual kind of a direction here. We have looked very well at the beauty of the message, how good it was. And we are obviously at a point where we're not happy with the way things are. That's quite obvious. But I think there's one little step missing. The message permeated Punjab and particularly, but Indian society during the Guru's period, which was about 200 years, perhaps 2 centuries?
239.
Well, 240 years. So a very rough ways to say. A couple of 100 years, which in terms of history is not even a drop in the bucket. Fairly quickly, yes, 10 generations, I agree, a couple of centuries. But the fall from that to where we are today, why was that fall so rapid and so complete and so thorough? I think those are issues perhaps that we need to look at. Now you want a simple one-sentence summary.
So we leave you with some
And I can't do
stimulating insights and provocative questions. And we wrap up our panel discussion. And thank you very much to my amazing panelists and to a very patient and it seemed like a very engaged audience. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki
Thank you, Jessi, Benji, and the panelists. Jaikara for them. Ke bole so nihal.
I'll be brief. Earlier, when we were talking about Sikhism and so on, at the tail end of that discussion, I said something about why was the rod so complete, so thorough, and so quick, the values of Sikhi. And we never touched it again. I will touch it. I will not complete it. I never complete any ideas. If you complete the ideas, that means it's finished. Life isn't finished. Not yet. Not for you, not for me. But there are a couple of things that what you need to say. Why did Sikh values fall away from our living so quickly? And there are a couple of things to look at. One is that I said Punjab has the strength of hybridization of its DNA, a more vigorous people. That I had said earlier, and I will repeat that, keep that in mind. Now, when the British took over India, they ruled India for 200 years. They ruled Punjab only for 100 years. They had respect for the Punjabi, largely Sikh soldier and the government. When that changed, the Sikh power base collapsed and the British ruled it for about 100 years. They took over. But they retained a respect for the Sikh soldier that they did not have for the other native Indians. History is witness to that. So what did they do? They encouraged Sikhs to join the British Indian Army. They respected their traditions. If you recall, when the Sikhs joined the army, they saluted the Guru Granth. They encouraged all that. So they encouraged the Sikhs to keep their practices, yet they encouraged them to be loyal now to the new government, which was British, and they recognized that the Sikhs, when they promised loyalty, will fulfill it. And that's what they needed. That's what they wanted. So they encouraged them to join the army, and they opened plenty of churches, of course, in Punjab, but that's secondary to some degree. But that was the quickest way to westernize the Sikhs without diminishing their values and ensuring their loyalty. And that's what they did. But it created a widening gap between the Sikh values and now the Western values that they were learning and bringing back to their villages and to their homes. The Granthi, the Gyani, the Gurdwara was not really equipped to be a good school for these westernized people, successful ones. It was not equipped for it, and we didn't do a damn thing about it. We let it go on successfully. And the Sikhs are a pragmatic people. People on the border always are, and because of their history, these people were. They were pragmatic. They saw the future lies now with the British. So let's follow their ways and their values, and they respect our traditions, and we will keep doing what we're doing. But then the gap between what we are and what we practiced grew. And that's what happened. That's what happened. So the Gurdwara, the traditional Gurdwara and the Gurdwara Granthi had almost no connection to how we live. They didn't teach that. They taught a set of rituals. Do this, do that, do 10,000 Japji Sahibs in a year, and you reserve a place in heaven. That's total nonsense from a Sikh point of view. But that's what we do. That's what we do. So that opened the gap. So let's not blame the British only for it. We had a lot to do with it. As a pragmatic people, we saw where the future is. Right? So that's why the fall was so fast and so thorough and so complete. It is a disintegration, a divide between our values as they were and our practices as they are. The values we should respect, the practices should play catch up, but we make sure the practices are not relevant, so they don't do anything about it. We don't do anything about it. It's more convenient to let things be. Now, this is not a complete answer. What it is an opening up of an issue, a problem, which has no quick answers. But without facing that, we can't reform our Gurdwaras, we cannot reform our way of life, and we cannot look to a very bright future. We got to face the way things are. So the fault is not with the British entirely. They were good businessmen, and the fault is not with our genes. We were also good businessmen, and we forgot what is real and what ain't. Thank you.